Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. One of the path factors is Samma Vayama, right effort. And this is defined in the description of the Eightfold Path as being the four right efforts. That is the effort to encourage those wholesome states that have already arisen to flourish, the effort to prevent unwholesome states from arising, the effort to diminish those unwholesome states which have already arisen, and the effort to rouse up those wholesome states that have not yet appeared. So it's a list of efforts that's all about developing the mind, encouraging the wholesome states and discouraging the unwholesome states. It's not to be thought of in a superficial way as trying to control your thoughts, for example, so that you only think good thoughts. The thoughts are a superficial aspect or level of what's going on in the mind, and they arise out of a mind that is either imbued with the wholesome qualities or imbued with the unwholesome qualities. By the wholesome qualities, we mean factors like the 7 bojjhangas, the enlightenment factors. This list is usually translated as enlightenment factor, but an alternate translation that has been suggested by Tenisero, among others, is Wings of Awakening. He's got a book by that title, and that's a kind of a literal translation. I think it's quite beautiful. Anga is a limb, or like the wing of a bird, and Boj is a grammatical transformation from Bodhi, wakefulness. So the Wings of Awakening. These factors are 7, and they come in 2 groups: the energizing factors and the tranquilizing factors, with mindfulness as the 7th in the middle. The tranquilizing factors are samadhi, tranquility, and equanimity, and the energizing factors are joy, investigation of dhammas, and virya, energy. And this is another word for related to Vayama. And the unwholesome factors, there are different lists of defilements, but the most relevant is probably the 5 nivarana, or hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, anxiety, and skeptical doubt. So this factor of right effort, as the path factor of Samma Vayama, must work in close conjunction with the path factor of Samma Sati, right mindfulness, because the first necessity is to be able to see the contents of your mind. This is Chittanusati, to be able to diagnose and know what is present in your mind, what factors are present. Are they the wholesome factors like the enlightenment factors, or are they unwholesome factors like the hindrances? Mindfulness by itself, it just knows and sees. But this factor of right effort requires that one take an active role in nourishing and protecting the mind. You nourish it so that the wholesome factors flourish, and you protect it from the unwholesome factors. So you do this in many ways. On a very basic level, very coarse level, you avoid seeking out situations or stimulus that will encourage the unwholesome factors. And you seek for those activities and stimulus that will encourage the wholesome factors. In the Visuddhimagga, there's a section about developing the enlightenment factors, and there are different ways and means to encourage each of the factors. But one thing that's common in each of these lists, it says that one should seek the company of those persons who have that factor and avoid those who don't. So if you're trying to encourage tranquility, seek out the company of tranquil people and avoid people who are agitated and excitable. If you're trying to develop energy, seek out energetic people as your companions and not slothful people. But in terms of the more subtler aspect, in terms of the internal work, developing the mind, it's not enough just to be aware of a factor. If you're aware of the defilement in the mind, that's the first step, to be fully conscious of it. So we don't try and repress or suppress mind states. We are fully aware of them, but then we seek to diminish them if they're unwholesome, or encourage them to flourish if they're wholesome. When I went through the list of the enlightenment factors, one of the energizing factors is virya. And that's a very closely related factor to Vayama. It's energy. The usual translation is energy. The root vir is a very common old Indo-European root that is expressed in Sanskrit and also in Latin. We have in English words derived from Latin such as virile and hero. They come from the same root that originally meant a young man. It came to have the connotation of a powerful or strong man. It became a hero. Vira in Sanskrit is a young man. Vayama is also etymologically related and more distantly. Another word from that same root is Vyas, which is means like youth. So there's the connotation here of being strong, putting forth effort. This is virya. And the managing of virya is very important in progress in meditation. We saw how the enlightenment factors are divided into two groups. There's another list, which is the 5 faculties, in which this is brought out even more clearly. The 5 faculties, which the indriya, which become, when they're fully matured, they become the 5 bala or powers. They also have mindfulness, sati in the middle, so you're balancing these 2 sets, which again are energizing and tranquilizing. And in this case, they form 2 pairs, complementary pairs or opposite pairs. There is sada, faith, which is paired with panya, wisdom, so that these 2 are opposite qualities but complementary, and they should be developed in tandem. And one has an unbalanced development if one or the other is predominant and overshadows the other one. Faith without wisdom is just superstition. And wisdom without faith is dry cynicism. So the 2 need to work in harmony. Likewise with the pair of virya and samadhi. Samadhi is that quality of mind that we particularly develop in meditation. It's usually translated, if you see it in English, in books, you'll see the word concentration. That's the translation for samadhi, but it's a very misleading translation. Samadhi is not at all to be equated with concentration. The definition of samadhi given in the text is non-wavering, so stability or stillness of mind. So a mind that has strong samadhi is not jumping around from object to object, but is rock solid, present with the object. The reason concentration is a bad choice of words for this is because concentration implies a narrowing of the mind. And this is a fundamental mistake that a lot of meditators make as they try and narrow their mind down. I've heard even people use analogy of a laser beam, which is quite misleading. You're not narrowing the mind onto the object. The mind that has perfect samadhi, the mind in jhana, is a vast, expansive consciousness. It's not a narrow, constricted consciousness, but it's still. It doesn't waver around wandering from this to that, but it stays in its place. It unifies with the object. So samadhi is a quality of mind that we're developing with meditation. But this samadhi has to be developed in tandem with virya, energy. Energy is the motive force, the driving factor. And a lot of the skill in meditation, a great deal of it, is balancing, harmonizing virya and samadhi. If you go off your meditation, if the meditation is going badly and you're losing it, it's always in one direction or the other, either to restlessness or to dullness. If it's dullness, that means if you have trouble staying awake, your mind is heavy, it's thick. This is an access of samadhi without a balancing factor of virya. So it becomes, the meditation then becomes kind of a hypnotic effect. You become sleepy and dull. But if there's not enough samadhi and there's too much virya, then you become restless and jumpy. It's hard to sit still. It's hard to keep the mind quiet. The mind is jumping around thinking of this and that. And the body is uncomfortable and twitchy and you want to move. But when these two factors are in harmony, the meditation takes care of itself. You're at ease, and the mind is still and calm, but wide awake and clear. The Buddha had a disciple named Sona, who was a musician before he became a monk. There's a monk in our tradition that we know named Sona, who was a musician before. And he took that name in honor of this character from the suttas. Sona was a musician, and he was having trouble with his meditation. And the Buddha came to see him and said, when you were a musician, how did you tune your lute? He says, well, we tighten or loosen the strings so that they're at the correct pitch. What happens if the strings are too loose? Then it's dull and you don't get the right sound. It's flabby sound. What happens if the strings are too tight? Then you can break them. And so it is with the meditation. You have to harmonize it so that it's neither too tight, too wound up, or too loose and idle. You have to find this sweet spot of perfect balance of energy and samadhi. And you can easily tell for yourself, which one of these factors is weak, which one is unbalanced. If you find yourself sleepy and tired all the time, that's you need to rouse up virya. That's not the time to try and work on your samadhi. People think, well, I should concentrate harder. But that's not the correct procedure at that time. It'll just make you more dull. There's a state of mind that the Thai forest tradition speaks of. They call it bhavanga, which is a word from Abhidhamma, but it's used in the Thai forest tradition. It's used in a somewhat different sense. Bhavanga being a kind of false samadhi. I've also heard it called Miccha Samadhi, false samadhi, which is really a dull, kind of sleepy state of mind, but it can feel kind of good. People can find it pleasant and sort of stay there for a while. It's kind of dull and sleepy, but there's no brightness, there's no clarity, there's no energy in the mind. And it doesn't lead anywhere. It's no value. So if you don't have enough energy, then the correct approach is to rouse energy by being energetic. Simple thing would be to do more walking meditation. But if this is insufficient, there are many other things you can do. The emphasis should be to try and wake yourself up and become energized. There's a sutta in which the Buddha goes to see Mahamoggallana, who became one of his great disciples. But in his early days of his meditation, he was plagued by sleepiness. And the Buddha came to see him and gave him various advice and tips. He told him, for example, get up and walk, or splash your face with cold water, or go out and look at the stars. And then one sort of odd one, he said, or pull on the earlobes. Maybe kind of yogic technique. Pulling on the earlobes is as a method of waking up. Also in Canada, in season, we also have the ability to go outside and walk barefoot in snow, which is a powerful awakening technique. Or a handful of snow on the back of the neck is also a good one. You got to do something to shake yourself awake. This is the first thing, and then you can carry on with the meditation. Don't allow yourself to sink into a sloth and torpor state. Another important aspect is attention to posture. If the meditation is very strong, then the posture is not so important. But if you're struggling to stay awake, it's useful to maintain a good posture. It's very beneficial. That means primarily that the spine be upright, that you're not slouched or twisted. But there are other smaller things you can do. One technique is to use a mudra of having the right hand in the left hand and the thumbs lightly touching. And if you're doing that, then if you start to fall asleep or get groggy, the thumbs will come apart because it takes a small amount of muscular effort to keep them together. So it's a good sort of self-check. There's also from Tibetan sources, there's also a technique of pressing the tip of the tongue onto the upper palate of the mouth. And that creates some kind of energetic, energize, like an acupuncture point. If you press the point where the hard palate goes into the soft palate, you press that with the tongue. It's another technique of waking up. But on the other end of the scale, if there's too much energy, there's not enough samadhi, then the meditator becomes restless. And this is experienced in the mind as a wandering mind, discontented mind, and a mind full of ideas and projects. And it's felt in the body as not exactly painful, but like twitchiness, like a urge to move. That felt on a muscular level. You can feel the muscles wanting to move. Now, the first principle in fighting restlessness in meditation is never ever give into it. The mind is a tricky beast, and it'll find 1,001 things you should be doing right now other than sitting and meditating. People will make all sorts of excuses in their mind, and a common idea is, well, if my meditation is not going well. If I got up and went for a walk, or if I, did this or that, or chop some wood, or whatever, then I'll be able to meditate better afterwards. We had one meditator here years ago who, at the end of her retreat, there were new curtains on the windows in the cabin. And I said, "Where'd you get these curtains?" He says, "Oh, I tore up an old dress and sewed them." So, instead of meditating, she's a restless mind. She does this kind of elaborate project going. So the quality of restlessness is only subdued by stillness. And that means, first of all, physically, if you're experiencing restlessness, then you should sit more still and sit longer. And walk less and walk slower. And with the mind, this is the time to really make an effort on your samadhi, to try and keep the mind still, make an effort to simplify your stimulus, and keep very quiet and still. Don't be looking for distractions, and try and attend closely to the object. So one of Ajahn Chah's favorite sayings was going against the grain, and this applies very much to this effort to balance these two factors. There's a good rule of thumb is whatever the desire mind is telling you to do, you do the opposite. If you're suffering from dullness, then you can feel the desire to just, slump over, bury yourself in a blanket, and bow your head and just kind of doze off. This is the desire mind telling you to do that. And if you're restless, the desire mind comes up with all these other things you should be doing other than sitting still. So if you find that, this is all operating at a fairly coarse level, but you find that if the meditation is reasonably going smoothly, you can notice in the mind a tendency to go one way or the other, and make subtle adjustments in your practice and in your way of holding and attending the mind. The balance point where it's going perfectly, I've heard referred to as diligent effortlessness. Another phrase is undistracted non-meditation. The perfect state is it doesn't feel like you're putting in any effort. It doesn't really feel like you're meditating. It's not like something you're doing. It's just a state of being. You're just there, you're present, and everything's perfectly balanced and harmonious. There's no struggle, there's no sense of effort being put forth. Now this is the state when you know you've got all the factors in harmony, they're all balanced correctly. In the Vipassana path, if one's attending to changing objects and paying attention to the contents of the mind, the state to be striven for, the goal to try and reach, is a state of equanimity about formations. This is a state of mind, it's one of a long list that's found, the nucleus of it is found in one of the suttas, and then it's been developed very much by the commentaries and by later meditation masters in Burma into a series of stages the mind goes through on the way to full awakening, to the realization of nirvana. And as far as effort can take you is this stage of equanimity about formations, which is the stage when everything is in balance. One is perfectly equanimous, meaning there's no strong emotional reaction to anything that arises. And the formations are the objects of consciousness. So one is neither attached nor repelled by anything that arises, but is clearly mindful, undisturbed. So at that point there's no dullness and there's no restlessness. And this is the place from which awakening can occur. Nirvana can be realized. Though it's not awakening itself, it's the only place from which it can occur. And the occurrence of the unconditioned is not something that can be had by effort. It just happens. So you put in the effort to get to this place of equanimity and clarity, and you just wait for the process to wind down. Now it's said by some of the modern writers on this topic, and I concur, it seems to be the case, that the meditator can only hold that state of equanimity about formations for a few hours at most before relapsing into the previous stage, which is marked by a certain amount of restlessness, a stage of reobservation. So the mind experiences some amount of discontent, and this restlessness arises as a chief defilement, and it can be felt in the body. And you can use that as if you notice this kind of a urge to shift and fidget arising, then that you know that you've fallen back to that stage. And the way to get through it and get back to equanimity is to sit still, is to bear through the sensations and get back to that place of equanimity. So this factor of restlessness is one that is very deeply rooted in beings. It is one of the fetters that isn't fully overcome until the stage of Arahant. So this, one thing to take from this is not to be too hard on yourself. Don't be too critical on yourself because you have restlessness arising. It will inevitably arise in your mind right until the end. This is one of the last to go. But that doesn't mean we should be complacent with it. We have to make that right effort to discourage unwholesome states from arising and to diminish those that have arisen. And restlessness is one of these. And it can be seen as a disturbance or an imbalance in the energy factor. Or at least this is one of the causes of it. Now, in terms of practical application of right effort or right energy, virya, in the practice, there's again another consideration of balance in that it's possible to tighten the lute strings too tight and they'll snap. And this is one mistake, is to try too hard, to bear down, to be ferocious in your practice and not be able to sustain it. The other error is the string is too loose. It's not putting in sufficient effort, being lazy, being slapdash, haphazard with the practice. You have to find that balance point. Another analogy that's a good one is holding a raw egg in your hand. If you squeeze it too tightly, it'll break and make a mess. But if you are too loose, your hand is too loose, it'll just slip out and fall on the floor and make a mess. But if you hold it just firmly and steadily, then it's the correct way of holding it. This analogy is a good one to consider in terms of meditation. And another pair of factors to work with is vitakka and vichara. These are two of the factors of first jhana related to thought. Vitakka is the initial striking of an object, and vichara is the steady holding of an object. One of the metaphors that's used in the Visuddhimagga for this is striking a gong. You know, the initial blow of the stick on the gong is vitakka, and then the tone that lingers in the air as the gong vibrates is vichara. So if you apply this metaphor to the practice of meditation on an object, then initially you have to apply vitakka. You have to strike the object. But thereafter you should hold the object, vichara, and use vitakka sparingly. If the mind wanders away, then you bring it back. It's striking the object. But if you continually strike the object, you don't get a nice steady tone from the gong. You just get a racket. Because with the mind, you don't overdo it. You use vitakka sparingly. Bring the mind to the object and hold the object. And this is another aspect of right effort or right energy. How to hold the object in meditation. Not too rigidly and not too laxly. To find that balance point. A lot of making progress in meditation is just this, finding that balance, finding the right application of effort or energy. So you get to that point of diligent effortlessness when there is a great clarity in the mind, a great stillness. There's no sense of effort or trying. There's not even a sense of I am meditating. But to get to that state requires some diligence and persistence. And initially, you have to put in effort in the course sense to get things started. But one shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that effort is pushing hard. I think in terms of a long-term practice, what's more important is steadiness and persistence, perseverance, sticking with it. Sometimes people ask, particularly after a retreat, and they're feeling very inspired. They ask, what do you recommend? How much meditation should a person do a day? That's impossible to answer because people's circumstances differ so much. It's impossible to give a number. But what is more important in a specific time elapsed time segment is the diligence and persistence of doing it regularly. So very good practice to set a specific time every day when you're going to meditate. And to do that regardless, whether you feel like meditating or not, is particularly when you have some resistance, when you don't particularly feel inspired or you actually have a resistance in the mind, then that's the most important time that you actually do it. This is the application of right effort. If there's some block, some difficulty in the mind that you don't want to face, and the mind shies off from going there. So the most important work, the most progress is made when you have some resistance and you push through it. You do it regardless anyway. So the rule of thumb is if you feel like meditating, meditate. If you don't feel like meditating, meditate. It's the guideline to to decide whether you should meditate or not. So I think that's probably sufficient. It touched on right effort from a few different angles. I hope that's something useful for you.
Andamaya Samataya Sadhikara Aramate
Sadhu, 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 anumodam.